Active learning is really focused on fostering engagement with the content and having the students do that. And brainstorming is a way to really think deeply about the content at hand and to also give the students a chance to connect to their own knowledge about it, their background knowledge, bringing it in, and then also to generate lots of new ideas and new answers and new solutions. So it's this idea of activating prior knowledge and combining it with your own experiences that make brainstorming a really powerful active learning technique. In terms of the continuum of active learning, there are strategies that range from really simple tasks to much more complex. And brainstorming falls at about the midway point in terms of the complexity of it, as well as the time commitment that's required. So we're talking about kind of a mid-entry point on this continuum of active learning techniques. So there's three different strategies that I want to share that promote brainstorming, and they're all based in research, and they also are all focused on divergent thinking, which means that there's multiple right answers. So when you're setting up the prompt or the question or the problem to be solved, it has to be broad enough that there's not just one singular answer, that there's many correct answers. The first strategy is called 6-3-5. So in this strategy, you divide the students into groups of 6, and they sit with their peers. Each student has the same prompt or question or problem in front of them, typically on a piece of paper that they're going to solve. And you start the timer, and in the 5 minutes that the students have, they have to generate 3 solutions or 3 answers or 3 responses to the prompt in front of them. After the 5 minutes is up, each student passes their paper one to the right. And now everyone is looking at the 3 ideas that someone else generated, and the timer starts again. They have 5 more minutes to generate 3 more solutions or 3 more responses to the prompt. And they can build off of what's on their paper that someone else kind of started with, or they can, add 3 new ideas. 5 minutes passes, and again, you do 1 more shifting of the papers to the right. And it's this third time through that actually the research says is the most powerful, where the most complex, best thinking happens. The second strategy is called hitchhiking. And it's a brainstorming strategy where your response has to be connected to the response of the person in front of you. And so once again, as the instructor, you develop a problem or a question or a prompt that has multiple right answers. One student answers it, and then the next student who responds has to connect their response to something that the student in front of them said. So much like hitchhiking, it's just this kind of development of a chain of ideas. This particular strategy, hitchhiking, works really well in the online environment because you can do it asynchronously. You can do it in a discussion forum. You can do it as part of a voice thread. And typically you assign one student to be the lead student to kick off that first response, and then students filter through just answering then and connecting to each other's responses. The last strategy is called forced connections, and this is the one that's a little bit more creative in nature. And essentially it involves gathering 5 to 8 objects that are completely not related to the content or what you're teaching. You bring in the objects, you display them, maybe you pass them out and let the students hold them, but you've got 5 to 8 completely unrelated objects. And the first thing you ask the students to do is to jot down the characteristics of each object. And so that's what most people typically think of brainstorming as. And so it is a component of this one. But if you're looking at, for example, a plant, because that's one of the objects, you would list the characteristics of the plant. You have the students do that with all the objects, and then you present them with a problem to solve or a question to answer or a prompt that you want them to respond to, and they have to force a connection between the object and its characteristics and their response. And so sometimes it's really difficult to do that, but it often results in some really outside of the box responses when they're forced to make a connection between an object that's not related to the prompt at hand. These are total participation techniques. Every student is required to participate. Every student has a role. So you don't get that one student who's dominating the conversation. And you also, on the opposite side of the spectrum, don't get that student who's sitting in the back not participating at all. So everyone is really participating and kind of has a role with each of these strategies. The second benefit, I think, is really just the fact that students are able to build off of each other's responses. And so when we're talking about building a community in a classroom, each person contributing and adding to other responses really develops kind of a cohesive feel to the classroom. And I think that contributes to a really positive environment when everyone has some input and you're building off of what other people say. And I think the last advantage is probably that these brainstorming techniques can be used across a variety of content levels. I teach for the School of Education and I can use them, but I think that they're really widespread and that they could be used with any particular content level that you want, as long as the questions are really, or the prompts are really well developed. And they really span the ages. These work for K through 12 learners, for undergraduate and graduate students, including adult learners. So I think there's a lot of benefit that everyone can participate really across content areas and across all ages.